So we'll go ahead and move on with our journey here through phase 2 of IDW's Transformers with More Than Meets the Eye, issue number 1. Written by James Roberts, art by Nick Roche, colors by Josh Burcham, letters by Sean Lee, and edits by John Barber. And it opens with Rodimus giving a speech sort of calling mostly the Autobots. Really, it's an open invitation to anybody who wants to join them to his cause. He says that he stands on a historic place, a place where the first Cybertronian realized he could change shape, where Nova Prime told the world that he built an ark, and where the 4 million year long war began, and that this invitation to board the Lost Light with him to find their ancestors, the Knights of Cybertron, ranks among those historic events for the Cybertronian species. Once again, he sees it as a way of continuing adventure, but also without, as he calls it, a gun in hand, meaning that they've earned the right by surviving this war to have this adventurous moment and not also be stuck on Cybertron with a bunch of non-affiliated Cybertronians sort of passing judgment and hating them. But Prowl is not so sure it's going to be as successful as Rodimus thinks it is. And we get to see a number of sort of Transformers make their decisions. Ratchet chooses to go with Rodimus. He feels as though he's getting old, that he's not quite the surgeon or doctor, for lack of a better term, that he used to be, and that it will give him an excuse to sort of go out into the universe and also see if there's anybody left out there that doesn't know the war is over and they can bring home. Chrome Dome and Rewind are both going to join Rodimus as well, much to Prowl's dismay. In fact, we get to see Prowl flip a table, which is something that Prowl's known to do in IDW. Always a great moment. And we also learn in the midst of this that Rewind is archiving everything, meaning he's recording everything that's happening, which has repercussions and such later. Cyclonus is another character that looks like he's ready to move on. And while he's sort of flying around contemplating his future, he detects a life form that ends up being Whirl, and he sort of barges in on him, freaks Whirl out. Him and Whirl start getting into a fight. And as they're fighting, it cuts to the kind of Lost Light boarding area, where Red Alert is kind of checking robots in to the ship. He checks in Brainstorm, who he tries to give a hard time about his briefcase. He wants to search it, being as though Brainstorm is, as he describes, the galaxy's most famous weapons engineer. So he wants to check his bags. Brainstorm says he's kind of beyond or above the law in regard to that. He has Rodimus's permission. And we also learn that Swerve is going to be joining us, who's quite the character in these books. In fact, Red Alert says Swerve's allowed to board the ship as long as he agrees to never speak. And Rung also joins the ship, who is or has been sort of like the psychiatrist for the Autobot infantry during the war to help them deal with all the kind of things they've seen. And it also begins the joke of Red Alert not knowing what his name is. And like it's like an ongoing thing in these books that like nobody can remember Rung's name. But we learn a little bit about Rung, that he builds these little arc models that are, of course, all destroyed by Cyclonus and Whirl, who are still in pursuit of the fight from one another. And the reason why this fight has broke out is because Cyclonus thought that he got a read on Scourge, but it was just sweeps. But there are sweeps corpses that Whirl had strung up all over the walls and was using as an audience to practice his speech for. So Whirl doesn't want Cyclonus to go out and tell anybody that he's been, desecrating these bodies, basically. So they give chase. They're still giving chase to one another, and they end up kind of squaring off, enough running. And Whirl sort of explains why he can't let Cyclonus go, and Cyclonus is trying to explain that he doesn't care. He's not going to say anything. He doesn't care about the sweeps and all that kind of stuff. And in the midst of all their fighting, Whirl basically knocks him out and looks like he's going to finish the job. But before he can, he's interrupted by an explosion from beneath the ground, and out crawls Tailgate, saying, "Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. I killed him." And Rewind says, "This is turning into a very odd day." So now Tailgate's in rough shape, and Ratchet offers, or basically says he feels obligated to take him on the Lost Light and fix him because he just can't leave him lying there offline. Now, we know from a previously established panel that Tailgate's been down in this hole for 6 million years, but that'll come into play a little bit later. Rewind, however, says that he has to make one last trip before he boards the Lost Light to say goodbye to someone, who ends up being Swindle, who Rewind, I guess, buys a disc off of, or a series of discs. And he's concerned that the discs could be fraudulent or phony. Swindle assures him, "You can't fake this stuff." And then says, "I gotta say, I didn't think wholesome little Autobots like you were into this kind of thing. You're sicker than I gave you credit for," which is a bit of ominous foreshadowing, I suppose. And now the Lost Light is ready to take off. We've been introduced to some of the key players, right? Whirl, Drift, Ratchet, Ultra Magnus, Cyclonus, Red Alert, Chrome Dome, Rewind, Rodimus, Rung, Tailgate, Swerve. A lot of these guys end up becoming key players. And we also know that Ultra Magnus is not entirely trusting of all of the other passengers that are on board. In fact, as he's going through the list, he says he's delusional, he's dangerous, he's a liar, he's mad, I don't trust him or him, like all this kind of stuff. Like he's not happy. And then he says, and I'm just talking about the A's, meaning he's going down the list in alphabetical order. And then he says to Rodimus, you should have put me at the door. I'd have turned away some of these wayward characters. And then Rodimus says, Magnus, your definition of a wayward character is an Autobot who wears their badge at an angle. And Ultra Magnus pretty much agrees that he would have. And Rodimus says, sometimes I wonder how you see the world, my friend. And you get to see through Ultra Magnus's view. He says, Rodimus dreams of being a hero and important, tends not to follow the rules too closely, means well, but his impulsive actions often get him into trouble, can be hot-headed, risk of criminal activity, variable. And then he looks over at Drift, ex-Decepticon, resist urge to arrest on sight, used to fight for Megatron, one of the most terrible warriors ever to stalk the face of Cybertron, granted amnesty under the Reintegration Act, risk of future criminal activity off the scale. So he doesn't trust these people, right, that he's going on this journey with. But the ship is taking off nonetheless. And they take off without even saying a word to Bumblebee, who's watching them leave with Prow and says, I thought you had a plan, to which the ship looks like it explodes. But it doesn't explode. It just ended up quantum jumping before they were ready, and now they're halfway across the galaxy and flying blind. There's also a breach in the hull of the ship, and numerous bots are kind of just being sucked out of the ship as they're moving through. Rodimus orders Drift to land the ship so they can have an active search party on not only, one, repairing the ship, making sure it's good to go, but two, finding all of these guys that have just been launched out of it. But in the distance, he sees what he thinks is a meteor shower, but Ultra Magnus says that's not a meteor shower. Those are the robots you're looking for, burning up as they re-enter the atmosphere, to which Rodimus sort of rubs his brow and says we're not off to a good start. The book closes with a sort of radio frequency interrupted as we look at Prow and Bumblebee together, and the radio frequency is from the future, and it says, hello, can anybody hear me? It's scrambled of the lost light. This message is scrambled. A failed experiment, I think, because if it worked, I wouldn't have had to send it in the first place. I'm calling from the future, and wait a second, and I have a scrambled for Rodimus. Abort the mission. Do not leave Cybertron. There are terrible things out here. We are not prepared. But if I've miscalculated and we've already left, please find a way to get this message to him now. It's a list of do's and don'ts. Actually, it's just a list of don'ts. Don't open the coffin. Don't let them take skids. Don't go to Delphi, and do not, I repeat, do not look in the basement. And for the sake of the Cybertronian race itself, please don't, and then the message fizzles out. And that's where the book closes, issue 1, with pretty much just an establishment that the ship is already not off to a good start. It has already not gone as planned. We're left to kind of think that perhaps there's some suspicious activity with Prow as to why it didn't get off to a good start. Prow is a very Batman-esque character in IDW where he will kind of make the ends justify the means. And we're introduced to kind of like a colorful cast of characters that we're going to be following on this journey. That, we get an ominous description, may not end well. And that's where we start The Lost Light. I'm going to cover issues 2 and 3 before I jump over to Robots in Disguise and read that simultaneously, and we'll move through this. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.